Okay, hi, my name's Biggenden. I'm the COO and co-founder of Nephos Technologies. We're a specialist data services integrator working with customers of pretty much all shapes and sizes across the globe to develop and execute on their customer data strategies. That ranges anything from modernizing and delivering large-scale storage and data processing infrastructure to AI and ML to all the way through to data governance and privacy frameworks. Now, today, on the eve of Data Protection Day, we're putting the spotlight on to data governance and data privacy, and we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Heather Federman, who's the Chief Privacy Officer of BigID, to get her expert view on the role and the intersection between data governance, data privacy, and security today. Heather, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks
to get things, you're very welcome. To get things started, could you introduce yourself, Heather, a little bit about what your role is and where your previous experience lies?
Sure. So as you mentioned, Lee, I am the Chief Privacy Officer at BigID, and my role encompasses actually a few things. One, it's running our data protection privacy program. So getting the chance to really build that from the bottoms up. It's been really exciting. I also get to work very closely with our product team on strategy and development and thinking about how someone like me, like a chief privacy officer or the privacy team, would want to use our platform. So, and then also getting to really be the privacy evangelist for the company, to speak about some of my views, to be out there in the world. It's been a really fun ride. I just hit my 2-year anniversary. And prior to that, I was the director of privacy and data risk at Macy's, where I was responsible for our team's policies, programs, communications, and training when it came to data privacy protection. Before that, I was at American Express on their global privacy risk team, and I was primarily focused on marketing, entertainment, sponsorships, as well as digital partnerships. And around the time we were getting into mobile payment technology like Apple Pay, Samsung Pay. And I started my career at the Future of Privacy Forum, which is a Washington, D.C. based think tank. Many of their supporters, advisory members, are chief privacy officers of various Fortune 500 organizations around the world, but also interact with advocates and academics. So it was a really great way to start my career in the wonderful world of privacy. And yeah, I mean, since my law school days, I've always just been really passionate about this field and very grateful to still be working in it today.
Thank you. And I think from our perspective, one of the reasons why we wanted to get you here with us today is because of that experience and that kind of passion you've got. So we really do appreciate it. I think for the benefit of others that haven't had a chance to speak to you or meet you, I guess, it'd be great if you could give us your view and your perspective in terms of what data privacy is, why it's important, why it's so important within today's organization.
Sure. And I guess, Lee, for me, I'd like to take a step back and really kind of talk about what is privacy, because it's something that seems a bit amorphous and fascinating because there's been different definitions throughout time. It's not like privacy just started because, Europe decided to create GDPR. You can go back all the way to the late 19th century when Louis Brandeis, who was a big advocate for privacy and a justice on the US Supreme Court, he had this definition of privacy is the right to be let alone. And so for a very long time, privacy was about this idea of, seclusion, keeping others out, because he, at the time, that's when photography was coming out and, wanted to keep the paparazzi out. And, you go, let's say, mid 20th century, you have Alan Weston, who is a really famous privacy scholar. And to him, privacy was the claim of individuals, groups, or institutions to determine for themselves when, how, and to what extent information about them is communicated to others. So it's more about this control of information, because by then we're dealing with major institutions that are processing a lot of data. So really trying to figure out, where does privacy come in here? Where is that extent of how do I get to control the information that is out there about me? And then the final definition I wanted to add was actually from a former boss of mine at, in a corporate context is that, the mission of the privacy team is to maximize the value of your organization's data assets while simultaneously protecting, preserving, and promoting trust. So now as we're getting into, let's say the 2020s, this, new age, privacy is now about trust. It's about how do I create and still keep that relationship of trust between myself and others, between the organization, between governments, because I think we've seen that there's so much mistrust that's out there, which is part of the reason I personally believe there's a lot of controversy out there because of that deep distrust. So I think all of these definitions still actually apply to privacy because privacy is very context based. It's still the right to be let alone if you're dealing with people on their phone taking pictures. It's still about controlling the information about you when you're dealing with a DSAR request. And it's still about trust. I want to work with organizations that I can actually trust are doing the right thing and using my data responsibly.
It's interesting, right? Because also, I think the change in the world generally and how more aware people are as consumers about their data makes quite a big difference to that whole landscape, actually. And it's quite interesting when you look at kind of use cases. I mean, I kind of view privacy as in a risk context, if you like, for customers. It's about kind of mitigating risk when it comes to their data assets. They want the world over, we're trying to store more data, process more data, and drive more insight from it, drive more value from it. So it'd be interesting to get your take on how organizations that you're speaking with day to day, or even in your past, how they're viewing privacy now, how that data privacy piece is impacting their corporate risk profile, because it's not just about it's not just the impacts of the consumer, as an impact on the risk profile of the organization as well, right?
You're correct. And I mean, I've always taken a risk-based approach when it comes to, corporate privacy initiatives and really thinking about it from that risk point of view. And I mean, there are various factors you will consider, one, just generally holistically speaking for a company, like what sort of company is it? What sort of data are you processing? Are you in a sector like, financial services or healthcare, or is it just publishing? There are different risks associated with each of them that have to be taken into consideration. Because then it really, if you start with the data itself, that let's say I'm at a publishing company and I'm not dealing with, highly sensitive information, but there is the risk because right now there's a lot going on in the ad tech world about, what sort of advertising you can and cannot do and the technologies you can use. So my risk there is a little bit different because it's legal, reputational versus financial. I'm dealing with very highly sensitive data. I have to make sure I have the right controls that are in place. How is my data being shared from X to Y to Z? So it's looking at, those individual use cases. Let's say you're doing a pilot program at the company, to, that whole kind of holistic view of, what is my company? What is my revenue? What are the potential regulatory impacts? And what is also the reputational risk? If something goes wrong, even if it's not going to be a legal fine involved, is this going to affect how consumers see me? Because it goes back to that question about trust. Are consumers going to become distrustful if we're not doing the right thing here?
Absolutely. And I think when we speak to our customers, there's certainly an element of that, particularly in certain industries where, brand's everything, right? You can lose it in minutes with that sort of issue. And I think, as I said at the top, we are seeing an overlap certainly between kind of governance, privacy, security, a kind of triad, if you like, of different elements of the overall stack across customers. And from your perspective, how do you see the kind of security, privacy, governance elements intersecting and overlapping?
Yeah, I actually really love to use a metaphor about plumbing. I know that's not always the best, idea, but I think it does the job in that, let's say if you're dealing with the actual pipes itself. So security would come in and want to make sure that those pipes are secure, that, nothing, there were no holes, so nothing's getting out. There's no way to infiltrate it, so nothing's getting in. So the actual protection of those pipes. Then you have the next step of, well, what's flowing through the pipes? Let's say we have water, AKA data. So privacy comes in and says, okay, well, where are we getting this water from? Where is the original, source point? How long are we keeping this for? Is it, going to go stale? Do we need to get rid of it? Do we need to delete it in a way that, it's the right way to do it? Are we, mixing this with, sharing this with, a source that's okay to share with or not okay? So privacy is the one that's really trying to figure out and ask all those questions. And then governance to me comes in, well, is this actually good quality water? Is it drinkable? What is the pH level here? Is this something that we can use? Is it even worth us holding on to? Is there any sort of thing that we can extract from this, this water that would actually be useful for, our whole plumbing organization? So to me, we're all dealing with, let's say, water, AKA data. So it's that one source of water, but we all have different concerns and use cases when it comes to it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I love that. I love the metaphor, actually. And I think when we look at governance generally, we think of it in terms of kind of classification, discovery, tagging, lineage, all these different elements that make up the quality model, right? And for us, we want to build out a data glossary that helps drive the quality of that data asset. Now, with regards to kind of putting these aspects into practice in an organization, quite often we see customers struggle to put the building blocks together, right? They've got people looking at governance, they've got people looking at privacy, they're not necessarily joined up necessarily. Some cases, yes, but not always. So in your kind of experience, how important is it, do you think, to get good data quality in place to feed that privacy use case? I mean, is it a prerequisite? Do you need good data quality before you can apply good data privacy, essentially?
I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg situation, but I would say that generally speaking, companies that spend the effort on good data quality, good data governance, they would have a better ability for overall compliance with privacy initiatives and regulations. So one example might be if I'm doing a DSAR, a data subject rights lookup internally for a report or a collection or deletion, the better quality my data is, the easier that's going to be and the less time consuming that process would be. So data governance and privacy can work together there. When you're doing a record of processing activity, you need to understand basically the source of your data from where the original provenance of where you collected it to how you're using it. So using a data governance tool like Lineage becomes very, very important there. And then also as the privacy team is doing their classification of data, what they care about from probably more of that sensitivity level, but also what they would consider personal data, making sure that's tied to what the data governance team does with their business glossary becomes very helpful, because again, we're working with the same source of truth of data, but the governance team might have a different perspective on how to use, let's say, something like a demographic like age, whereas privacy is going to say that might be somewhat sensitive, whereas governance might say yes, but the company might think that they might prefer this sort of coat versus another. So just as an example, so it's going back to that. There's the same data, different use cases, but if we work together, then it makes the whole company's life easier, because it's really the blood that has an organization flowing at this point.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think in most cases, when we look at data generally and data initiatives generally in organizations, it's the lion's share of what gives them competitive advantage these days. So it is everywhere. It is the lifeblood, as you say. And hopefully you don't mind me saying, but you've had obviously senior data privacy roles in some of the largest, kind of most prestigious organizations, right? You've got Amex, Macy's on they're great places to be, right? So, and in the past, before moving to BigID, it'd be really interesting to get your insight, I guess, from the customer side, if you like. what do you often see as the biggest pitfalls or the biggest barriers to enforcing these privacy practices? I mean, where do people fall over most, do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I think about, running a privacy program in terms of people, process, and technology. And, so if you break that down, first starting with people, and I will say at those, at my former organizations, and even at this one, I work with some really awesome people. I've been really lucky in my career to have, former mentors, bosses in privacy who are great. And even today, the team I work with is pretty great today. So I think one of the challenges, though, that we've all experienced, especially in the privacy side, is when you have folks in the business who have no clue what privacy actually is. So getting them to understand it, getting them to care, making yourself less of an enemy, more of, a friend, or as sometimes I jokingly called myself, like a data sheriff. Because you kind of become a cop, like you become a data cop, and you're the one that is there to kind of say, these are the rules and I've got to enforce the rules. So it's the other thing I've also realized, and this is especially true for large organizations, and something I was working on at Macy's, is this idea of having privacy champions in your business. So we call them trust managers at Macy's, but I've heard just that, that sort of term, privacy champions. And the idea is that, let's say I have a massive organization, I'm the privacy team, but I have someone in marketing and credit, and fraud, in, products, and they're, part of their job, let's say 20% of their job is just, getting that extra education in privacy, getting connected to the privacy office. So that way they are the first line of defense. They are the ones that are seeing what's happening. And even if they're not the experts, they can say, this, smells a little fishy. Maybe I should let, the privacy office actually know what's going on. That is a really great way to kind of try and catch all the things that could have fall through the cracks. And part of that then goes into the next level of process. And I'm not the biggest fan of bureaucracy and red tape, but like any organization that's dealing with data, and in general, you have to have standard operating procedures and policies in place. And this comes down to, your overall privacy policy, to how you should handle data in a given situation. Like, in your email, if you're sending sensitive data, put it in an attachment, encrypt it, send the password separately. Like, that's standard data protection 101, but you have to have that in a policy somewhere, in an SOP, and you have to make sure it's enforced. So that enforcement aspect with process becomes very, very challenging, to make sure those processes are actually happening. And, part of that can be with the training, you're doing that with your privacy champions, but then that also goes into the technology part of it. I think the privacy profession up until recently has been pretty manual based. You're relying on surveys, which get outdated really easily. You're relying on a, impact assessment maybe you did 2 years ago, and there's no way to really check that this is still the same that it was 2 years ago. So being able to automate, knowing what data your company has, being able to check on that, to get insights from it, to be notified if there's a material change to something like a PIA, or anything like that. Being able to have that evergreen policy is incredibly helpful in multiple aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it comes to that, your last point, if you don't understand the data sets that you're storing, if you don't have that governance element, that glossary, how do you know how you're handling it correctly, right? I mean, if you can't see it, you can't do anything about it. So I think that's a really, really good point. And I guess, in your latest role as Chief Privacy Officer over at BigID, obviously you've gone from client side to vendor side, if you like. I mean, what drove the change? What led you to join the team at BigID?
Yeah, I was, I think, in my 4th or 5th year at Macy's, and I knew for me, I wanted to go to a smaller organization, where it was something that was up and coming, and where I could lead their privacy program, and, whatever their bottom line was something that I deeply cared about. And, through a random connection. I met Nimrod Vax, who's one of the co-founders at BigID. And I knew like that in that first call that like, I'm like, wow, this is where I'm supposed to be. And it's, you know, like I think I mentioned, like I just hit my 2-year anniversary.
Yeah.
And it's been really great. And because I remember actually one of the things I learned in my former role, you know, when we're setting up the, you know, the training, the data protection program, it's starting with that foundational layer of knowing your data. So I love that I'm now at a company where, I mean, we like actually can help you know your data. So it's getting to automate that part of, you know, the whole process for privacy. And yeah, I mean, being at BigID, you know, folks here really, really care about the mission and the platform that we're creating. And it's been really exciting. I never thought I'd work for a vendor because I actually really hate it when vendors call me. It's really bad. So like, I mean, this is the universe's joke on me. But I do enjoy the B2B side of, you know, helping out our customers with their needs. I think, you know, there's something really exciting about that, and seeing their successes makes me feel like we're a success.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that drew us to BigID as an organization initially, was kind of that whole, well, it's two things. From a technology perspective, from the whole discovery and classification and understanding, as you say, understanding your data is such a foundational piece. And it sounds really simple, but it's really not, actually. It does sound easy. It's really not. And the amount of customers that we speak to where they've bought tool after tool after tool to try and do that, but actually, when you look at the way infrastructure moves and data moves generally, it's adapting and it's changing so quickly. Like every day, it changes. There's a new piece of tech. Oh, well, now we want to use this service over here, and now we want this, and trying to keep up with that is a nightmare, right, for people. So I think for us, and from our perspective, when we found BigID as a platform, we felt it really gave us an opportunity to kind of help customers operationalize that governance piece and the privacy piece that goes with it. And actually blending all of those three things in one arena, if you like, is super, super powerful. And when we launched our governance service, our data governance service, yeah, we've operationalized that, but actually a lot of the work that we end up doing with customers is helping them navigate through the steps in the first place, because you're quite often, we find certainly that you need to reset. There needs to be the kind of a level set, if you like, on what have we got? Well, what's the problem? What are our critical assets? Where are they? Well, who owns it? And again, it comes back to all of those things, right? And data ownership's a big one that we see time and time again. But, you know, that sort of support's really important for us. And like I say, that kind of gold standard, if you like, of understanding your data is really where the BigID piece came in for us. So I think we're kind of coming to the end of time. I'd just like to say thank you for joining us, really. It's been really good having you. Really great to hear your views on the privacy space and how that's impacting businesses. For those of you that are viewing, if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing and what BigID are doing, then you can visit BigID at bigid.com, and we're nephostechnologies.com. And Heather, like I said, I'd just like to say big thanks for joining us today and taking the time out to do so.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lee. It was great.
Pleasure. Thanks, Heather.
Bye.